Hi, my name is Liz, and Jocelyn, Shannon, and I will be discussing the TAPS 4, which is a language processing skills assessment. So what we know already about the TAPS 4 is that it's a standardized assessment and it's a language processing skills assessment. So what we want to know about this assessment is the purpose of it and the interpretation of the results, and how we can discuss the findings with parents and other professionals. What we will learn from this presentation is the definition and characteristics of central auditory processing disorder, as well as the assessment areas of the TAPS 4, and the links between language processing skills and auditory processing skills.
Okay, so a little bit about the TAPS 4. So the TAPS 4 assesses 3 skill areas, including phonological processing, auditory memory, and listening comprehension. So within those 3 different categories, there are 11 different subtests. And within each subtest, there's also a supplemental test. So for the phonological processing, there's word pair discrimination, phonological deletion, phonological blending, and syllabic blending, which is a supplemental test. And within the auditory memory, there is number word memory, sentence memory, number memory reverse, which is supplemental. And then finally, within the listening comprehension, there is processing oral directions, which is without background noise, auditory comprehension, and auditory figure ground processing oral directions with background noise, which is also a supplemental test. So all these different areas underpin the development of effective listening and communication skills, which is critical to the development of higher order language skills and literacy skills. And then a little bit about the administration side of the TAPS 4. The administrators include SLPs, psychologists, educational and learning specialists, and other professionals who need a reliable and valid measure of auditory language abilities in children, adolescents, and young adults. So the administration time for this test is typically between 60 to 90 minutes long, and it assesses children ages 5 to 21 years old. So it's designed for school-age children. And then why the test is important: again, it provides information about language processing and comprehension skills. And then this assessment, the TAPS 4, also features audio administration for the subtests, which includes proper pronunciation of speech sounds, which helps provide a greater degree of standardization and accuracy during the testing process.
So with the TAPS 4, the scoring, measuring, and analysis, due to the different indexes that Shannon just went over, every subtest has a different type of scoring, but it's always either going to be 0, 1, or 2 for the raw score. So as you can see down at the bottom here, this is one of the subtests. If the child gets it completely correct, they get a 2. If they get it partially correct, it's a 1. And if they don't get it correct at all, it's a 0. Some of the subtests just have a 0 or a 1, either they got it right or not. But what they do is the administrator adds up all the raw scores from each item from all the subtests. They convert the raw score to the scaled score to the standard scores, which they have all the tables and indexes within the manual. And this assessment is also norm referenced as well as standardized. So what that means is the individual being tested, their scores go against or are measured comparatively to other people, depending on their age, that are usually neurotypical, and they go against this bell curve. So for example, a scaled score, for this test, the values range from 1 to 19, and the mean or median is a score of 10. The standard deviation is a 3. So if the individual scores a 10, they're right in the middle, and that means that the individual's performance is better than that of 50% of all the other individuals in their same age range within the norming sample. and so on and so forth. If they go down 1 standard deviation, 2 or 3, usually depending on the administrator and where the administrator works, if it's a school, private practice, whatnot, usually under 1 standard deviation or more below the mean means that the individual would probably qualify for services based on how they scored in each specific subtest. Now, because there's different indexes, the index scores are the overall sum of all of the scaled scores. So it's just another way to break down how the individual performed, not just from each subtest, but from the index in general. So whether that index is auditory memory, listening comprehension, or phonological processing. So it gives us a full comprehensive understanding of how the individual performed. So what exactly is central auditory processing disorder? Central auditory processing disorder is also used with the same terminology as just auditory processing disorder. I'm just going to show a short little clip just to explain it.
Results from deficits in the brain pathways responsible, or APD, results from deficits in the brain pathways responsible for processing sound. There is no hearing loss or any problems with the ear itself. In a normal individual, if the statement, "the boy jumps the fence," is verbalized, the auditory cortex of the brain correctly processes the sound and the person comprehends the statement, "the boy jumps the fence." However, with CAPD, something prevents the accurate processing of the verbal statement made even though the ear properly hears the sound. The boy jumps the fence. The boy jumps the fence. The boy jumps the fence. Often, someone with CAPD will hear a wide range of different words and/or add in extra letters from what was actually spoken. With such alterations, it changes the entire meaning and understanding of the spoken sentence. If CAPD is not recognized in an individual and addressed, processing delays will undermine the natural development of learning and reading. It is important to keep in mind that individuals with CAPD do not have speech delay and have normal hearing tests, which often results in a delay in diagnosis. CAPD is often considered the ear version of dyslexia, which is a visual processing disorder. As such, educators and healthcare professionals should maintain a high index of suspicion for CAPD whenever there is concern for accurate verbal comprehension in spite of a normal hearing test.
So as the video said, CAPD is not due to peripheral hearing loss, so central or conductive hearing loss. It's due to some sort of deficit in the neural processing of auditory information to the brain, and it's not caused by higher order language or cognition deficits, but it can bring about or negatively impact language processing or cognition processing, but it's not caused by that. And there's a correlation that CAPD may coexist with other disorders such as ADHD, language impairment, or language disorder. It's also important to note that an audiologist really has to diagnose CAPD. Other people, such as psychologists or SLPs, they can have a high suspicion or maybe have like some sort of indication that someone might have CAPD, but they cannot formally diagnose it.
The purpose of the TAPS-4. So this is meant to assess language processing skills. It does not diagnose a central auditory processing disorder. So although originally the TAPS assessment stood for test of auditory processing skills, it was later changed to test of language processing skills. So the manual will go into this in further detail, and I will explain that in a moment. The TAPS-4 measures two narrow abilities in auditory processing, which are phonetic coding and resistance to auditory stimulus distortion. So auditory processing includes a wide variety of skills. And this includes sound localization and lateralization, auditory discrimination, auditory pattern recognition, temporal aspects of audition, and auditory decrements with competing and degraded acoustic signals. So because auditory processing is just one component in the broader set of skills described as oral language processing, so auditory processing is just one component in the broader set of skills described as oral language processing. So language processing includes a variety of cognitive and linguistic skills such as phonological awareness, auditory attention, auditory memory, and conceptual knowledge. So because auditory processing is considered to be a part of oral language processing, we've now come to the conclusion that the TAPS is a measure of language processing skills more than it is a measure of auditory processing skills. So it's important to note that when you're communicating with other professionals, clients, and families. It's important to clarify that while the TAPS does measure two aspects of auditory processing, it is not a comprehensive assessment of auditory processing skills.
Okay, so evidence-based support. So I'm going to focus on the article on the left side, which is titled Phonological Awareness, Explicit Instruction for Young, Deaf, and Hard of Hearing Children. So I decided to focus on phonological awareness with deaf and hard of hearing children, since the TAPS-4 does focus on phonological awareness. And since many deaf and hard of hearing children with functional hearing are not developing age-appropriate phonological skills. So this study investigated the development of phonological awareness in 5 deaf and hard of hearing children. And they all either wore hearing aids or had cochlear implants. So the study focused on the effects of explicit instruction on the acquisition of phonological awareness skills by, again, the children with functional hearing. So the areas measured included syllable segmentation, initial phoneme isolation, and rhyme recognition. So for the test, it was a 9-month span. So the children individually received 1 hour of explicit phonological awareness instruction 4 times a week. And then following the study, compared to their baseline scores, all of the 5 children showed they developed age-appropriate phonological awareness skills in the 3 areas measured. So then, in conclusion, so based on the study, explicit instruction in early phonological awareness skills may provide deaf and hard of hearing children with functional hearing the ability to manipulate the different sounds in spoken language, which, along with alphabetical knowledge and the foundation for learning to decode words and read with a level of functional proficiency. And so though phonological awareness has not typically been a part of the reading instruction of deaf and hard of hearing children, teachers and educators should know that such development is possible, especially for those deaf and hard of hearing children with functional hearing.
So the article that I researched was titled The Impacts of Language Background and Language-Related Disorders in Auditory Processing Assessment. This was a study done in 2013, and it studied the correlation or the impact of an individual's language background, whether they're monolingual, bilingual, trilingual, and if they have a language-related disorder, which would be considered dyslexia and or language impairment in this study. And these 2 variables and their impact on the performance of tests of auditory processing, which included speech and non-speech aspects. So their participants were 133 multilingual children, mostly with English as their additional language, and 71 monolingual children, ages 7 to 12 years old, and they were all native English speakers. What the study found was that language background did not have a significant effect on the 3 non-speech auditory processing tests, but the multilingual children performed worse in their second language. And children with dyslexia and or a language impairment performed worse compared to those without those types of language-related disorders. So what the researchers concluded was that most tests that claim to examine auditory processing disorders are poor in validity. Due to this study, which showed that the different variables of having a different language background or a language-related disorder is more so you cannot claim that these individuals that took these test or assessment have a central auditory processing disorder. More so, it could have just been a language difference that impacted their performance or their language related disorder. So pretty much what we were going back to in that an audiologist really needs to confirm and diagnose central auditory processing disorder. And it's important to note that different variables from different individuals as future SLPs, we have to look at them holistically and make sure that different variables can impact and not be quick to diagnose if someone were to maybe have an indication of a central auditory processing disorder. That's it for our presentation. If you have any questions, please let us know. Thank you.